I'm Julie Barton.
I'm Monica Bollinger.
I'm Robin Brooksbank.
Bolorma Jemiasra.
And I'm Nicole Helgett. I grew up on a family farm in southern Minnesota, right on the Little Cottonwood River. When my 5 sisters and I were young, we enjoyed wading and fishing in it and in Lake Hanska, which was only a mile away from our house. By my early teens, however, as more farmland was rolled over into crop production, it was clear that swimming and fishing in those waters was no longer going to be possible. The waters were sludged, they smelled, they even looked dead. Now, I live on a farm adjacent to 7 Mile Creek, which feeds into the Minnesota River. That water, too, is surrounded by crop production. Because the land is so saturated with artificial nutrients and manure, even our drinking water is contaminated with phosphates and nitrates, which was discovered by my daughter Violet. Violet is a 4th grader at Monroe Elementary. A few weeks ago, she presented her science fair project, What's in Your Water? She got a purple ribbon and is on to the regional science fair in a couple of weeks, which is so awesome. What's not awesome is her results. Our beloved creek, 7 Mile, is contaminated with fecal coliform and makes it impossible for her and her brothers to play in it. Violet is also a big reader, obsessed with the Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, who grew up on the banks of Plum Creek, which is in Redwood County, Minnesota. Redwood County also hosts one of the largest farm fests in the nation every August, bringing in around 40,000 farmers, legislators, and crop consultants. We're thinking that this is the perfect county to launch our initiative. Our state motto is the land of 10,000 lakes. We are the people who feel a deep, visceral connection to our winding rivers and our creeks and our watering holes. Our program, called the Plum Creek Initiative, will help Minnesota live up to its legacy as a great steward of its natural resources so that we can all bring our children back to the water.
Those waters are in crisis, both in Minnesota and the Gulf of Mexico, where I'm sure you are familiar with the hypoxic zone. But did you realize it had grown to the size of the state of Massachusetts? Research has shown that the cause of the hypoxic zone is agricultural runoff. And of the 32 states whose water end up in the Gulf, Minnesota is the 6th largest contributor of agricultural runoff. And how does that runoff get to the Gulf? Through the Mississippi River. And of course, Minnesota is the home of the source of the Mississippi River. What happens upstream matters. And our focus today is not on the Gulf, but instead on southern Minnesota, whose waters flow ultimately into the Gulf. In southern Minnesota today, 80% of our public lakes and waters are unfit for fishing and swimming. That's why Nicole's children can't swim in their local lake. On this graph, the red identifies the waters in Minnesota that are most threatened, and Redwood County is in the middle of that area. The chief impairment that causes these problems are excessive nutrients from phosphorus and nitrogen, which are caused by fertilizer, both produced commercially and spread manure. We know that too much nitrogen in our water makes it unsafe for drinking, especially for infants. Too many nutrients overall cause toxic algae growth, unsafe swimming and recreational conditions, and ultimately dead zones for aquatic life. The source of those excessive nutrients and the size of the problem are known. And in Minnesota, we have a long history of paying attention to natural resource conservation, and there are programs that have been designed to reduce nutrient loads. So why are nutrient levels increasing and not decreasing? Part of the problem is competing public policy. Farmers are pushed to maximize production and global exports through such drivers as the Farm Bill and the recent development of the biofuel industry. On the other hand, there are incentive-based conservation programs which encourage farmers to reduce their nutrients. What we've learned is the real problem at the front line is both economic and cultural. Our research has shown that farmers value independence and local community. Because of that, they do not trust what they see as top-down mandates coming from city slickers who do not understand the real difficulties of the farming world.
We know from our research that top-down mandates don't work. My work is an executive director for a nonprofit in Somalia. We focus on keeping girls in school, ending child marriages, and female genital mutilation. I'm clearly not part of their culture. I can't be the person to say this practice must stop. My job is to support the Somali communities by providing them with the tools that they want. Although the farming culture and the Somali culture seem quite different, we know in both communities that the change must come from within before any changes can be made.
To achieve those changes, we must have a reframing from between the government agencies that provide programs to reduce nutrient reduction and the farmers themselves, where there is a questioning of their stewardship commitment. That is where our program will come in. The Plum Creek Initiative combines a thorough understanding of the rural psyche together with a recognition of the urgent need for water quality improvement. Our secret sauce is the use of key influencers who have not traditionally been involved as active stakeholders in the water quality policy area, rural women. Our solution will offer paid fellowships to women from Redwood County to learn about water education, leadership skills, and have networking opportunities. Fellows will engage their neighbors and their families in discussions, deep discussions, that will not place blame, but are focused on developing a nuanced understanding of agriculturally impacted water quality issues and solutions.
Why women? Rural communities have social scripts that's important to understand before asking for change. It influences community and individual perception of problems, solutions, choices, change, and well, everything. Our PCI fellows live that social script from being within that community. They can communicate with the farmers in the same verbal and nonverbal language and communicate their message without bias or judgment, opening the door for real change. Women are more receptive to hearing and learning about issues that affect their family and their community. They need more opportunities to develop leadership and organizational skills to help bridge the gap between men and women in income and leadership roles in the community. Our theory of change is that women are the key in making adaptive changes about attitude and water quality. Empower them with knowledge and time and money, and they will encourage water-friendly farming practices. Farmers will adopt those practices. Success is contagious. More farmers will implement water-friendly farming. PCI will move to the next county. Water quality improves. Fellows will receive a grant and childcare expenses during the workshops and training as part of our initiative. We will choose the fellows from the 26 townships in Redwood County and an American Indian reservation. They will attend workshops that are led by local expert educators. They will then design their own community outreach water quality programs and implement them throughout the year. We know that these women work hard on the farm, and many of them have part-time jobs as well. So we have planned a series of weekend workshops to accommodate their busy schedules. We've received positive feedback and excitement from policymakers and leaders within Redwood County. These community members support our initiative, and we will leverage their influence in sponsoring the initial 8 to 10 fellows to become change agents in their own community. Our budget, we will source grants from a few organizations that have been committed to water quality issues for decades. We are working on a partnership with a lead agency, Renewing the Countryside, to provide us with an organizational structure so that we don't divert our own resources creating another nonprofit. How will we measure success? Our fellows will tell us by the plans and activities that they implement. We will measure how many water tests they hand out to the community so they can see for themselves the quality of their own drinking water. We will measure success by the attitude of the community through surveys.
So if I may start the questioning, your revenues are primarily the grant. Anything else?
For now, we have, as we said before, we have cooperation with Renewing the Countryside. We want it to be conservative and realistic when it comes to budgeting. So $25,000 as for the first year budget is realistic and also going to kickstart a project. And in the beginning, we do not want to assume that we would get some corporate sponsorship or anything like that. We want to be clear-cut, and also we do have talks with other organizations, corporate organizations such as seed companies, but we want to be absolutely sure before committing and getting money from such organizations. So in the beginning, we would like to get and rely on grants instead of any other means. But down the line, yes, we do plan to use
But
other
the
means.
heart of the matter here is that you will have to convince the people who pollute this not to do that. So this is basically an economic problem in that we have very powerful lobbies and powerful forces that pollute, not only here in Minnesota, but elsewhere. The question then is, how do you basically, without having any legal force, persuade this polluter not to pollute?
It's a very good question. In southern Minnesota, most of the farms are actually pretty small still. So we have farmers who are running around 400 acres. So it's not necessarily corporations who own this land. That's true in other countries, but not quite yet in Minnesota, although it might be coming, I'm not sure. On the family farm, it is true that farmers do rely heavily on the consultation of their crop consultants. But in our conversations with some of those folks, they too are seeing, and it might be, they might have economic reasons for this, but they're seeing a way to get into conservation, and they are actually interested in helping programs like ours get started.
But what is the economic incentive to move away from that?
So here's how it works. The farms are private, and also it's a farm, household-owned farms, right? So it's not a corporate-owned land we're talking about. We're not in Canada or in Latin America. Minnesota is unique in its own. Economic incentive perfectly makes sense. Why are the farmers? They're growing the crops with the intent of increasing the yield. Hence, we have high nitrogen and even fecal matter in the water. So how can we change this? Well, there are tons of programs already exist. Government organizations, even our governor has a new program. And also there are things such as Clearwater Fund. Why are those giant $100 million projects are not working? Because farmers, as our group members have already told you, they do not like to be told what to do. It's their land, it's their choice. What should come is from within. So precisely that's why we're tapping into the untapped new area, which is the rural women who are willing to have those leadership skills, opportunity to show and make a difference. And as our friend Nicole just said also, their maternal instincts in itself will be more motivated to make sure the kids can actually swim in the water. Hence, we're targeting the rural women. And yes, economically, it is important. But there are programs such as exist, like tax incentive, negative tax, you already know, such as, or the buffers. They are provided either for free or you can apply for grants. But farmers are not adopting it. Why? They do not like to be told from somebody from the city just walk in and say, you have to put it on your land. Though it is, yes, buffers are costly, it costs $6,000. But it's free technically, but they are not accepting it. Why? Because they do not like to be told. They need somebody from within to choose to make a change. And that's why sometimes the problem is so giant, but the solution can be very simple.
So just last question on my front at this time. So the issue for you is the messenger,
Absolutely.
not the inherent economic problem.
Well, sir, there is an economic problem because they are independent business people, and so they are focused on profit, loss, and risk. And they are sometimes reluctant to adopt new technologies that they don't think are proven or that they feel may reduce their overall economic sustainability. But there are so many cost-sharing, as Valerma mentioned, there are cost-sharing programs, there are tax incentives, there there are many programs that have existed for many years that are not being adopted. So the economic impact is greatly reduced.
And one of the things that we hope our fellows can talk about with our farm families is the fact that these practices that are polluting the waters are actually taking out of the local economy because recreational activities are no longer possible. So you can't have boating, you can't have fishing in these places that would normally attract tourism. Another thing that's kind of quiet in Minnesota is the fact that so many of our small communities are having to upgrade their water filtration systems because the nitrates are now in the groundwater too. The soil is so saturated that it's getting into the groundwater and it's going through the tap system. So
are you going to be able to recruit? How many women do you expect to recruit, and how do you know you can do it?
I am a rural woman, and I know a lot of rural women, so we have a great network in southern Minnesota already, and initially we're going to look at trying to get between 10 and 12 women that we personally know. We're looking at a really tight network right now because we want it to be completely successful in this first county. The women in Redwood County really want leadership roles like this. There's an enormous wage gap in that county. It ranges from $10,000 to $15,000 at any education level. 80% of the management positions in that county go to men, 70% of the service positions go to women. They're looking for something like this to do, and our program gives them a little bit of income too. Many of these women, as Monica said, are already working in some capacity, and they're looking for flexibility because they are working on the farm. Many of them have children, and so they're doing things like, having in-home daycares or selling essential oils or Tupperware. I think our program would be really great for them, and I think they'll be really influential.
I thought that we had come somewhere in terms of the application of fertilizer with the use of computerized and geosystems, so that there was much more, instead of broadly spreading fertilizer, there was now much more application of fertilizer to the specific rows or specific plants. What's happening with that, and how does that fit into this? And since that requires some addition of technology, I know almost nothing about this, so it requires some addition of technology to the tractor. Is that a possible partner?
Yes, that is being done, and that's wonderful. And that also tells us that some corporations are getting on board, and they're understanding that not only is this economically beneficial to them, but they're also interested in helping us clean up our water. A farm where I live does just what you're saying, where they come out and use GPS to pinpoint where the nitrogen and the phosphorus go, which is absolutely wonderful. But this farmer happens to be able to afford that, and not every farmer can. Also, there's not a lot of oversight on it. We do have a lot of kinds of regulations in our state, but not many of them have real teeth where you can go out and say, okay, this was not done correctly. You got too close to the ditch, or you got too close to the field intake. You're supposed to stay this far back. There aren't really a lot of programs to do that, and there isn't a lot of political will in our state to take it on, because it's probably not going to be successful at this moment in our state trajectory.
You've repeated on more than one occasion that people don't like to be told. So what makes you think a group of women are going to be able to go in there and tell men farmers, which I understand there are women farmers.
Yeah.
What makes you think that you're going to be that persuasive?
It's a good question. The face of the farmer is changing too. In my own family, we lost most of our farm between the late 80s and 90s, and my dad left. We had inherited this farm, and he just couldn't handle it. My mom was left to take over what was left after a really emotional auction of most of our land and our machinery. So she runs 80 acres herself right now, and I know that there are other women like her. She's in her 60s, but there are so many women out there whose partners have died, or whose children weren't interested in farming and maybe moved on, and now they're kind of left with all of these decisions to make. And so I think that we have to think about farmers in a different way too. It's not necessarily men. It's women too who are making these massive decisions, and it's going to be a woman-on-woman conversation in a lot of cases.
And to add on that, the data shows that 50% of farm owners are women. So maybe in the beginning, we do not have to tap onto the male farmers. Maybe 50% of the farmers are being, part of a project, and if it decreases, it makes a difference. That's a huge difference in itself. So with that, we do strongly believe that our project will indeed succeed because, as Nicole said, the farmers are no longer dominantly men. It's literally half and half.
In some of Belarma's work too, she has noted that studies have proven that if you give a certain amount of money, let's say you give $1 to a woman, 90% of that will go back into the family. If you give it to a man, and I'm not trying to create, a gender war in this room by any means, but if you give it to the man, only 72 cents will go to the family. So we think we're onto something here.
Now, I don't know if it's gotten as far as Redwood County, but aren't we seeing something where a lot of the new farmers are now immigrants? And does that factor into what you're thinking about too?
Yes, unfortunately, they don't have the power to buy up a lot of land right now, but in Redwood County, we have a really rigorous Hmong population, and they are agrarian people, and so we're hoping that we can attract a Hmong woman as well. There's also an American Indian reservation in Redwood County, and we're also hoping to attract a change maker from that community.
So tell me a little bit about how you will evaluate the effectiveness of the program. How will you know that your intervention actually made a difference?
Very good question. At first, we're going to look at participants. We're going to see how many people, how many women are actually interested in engaging with us and going to this fellowship. And from our initial surveys, we think it's going to be pretty good. After that, we're going to kind of count how many contacts they make with different people in their community. And each of those women that we choose for our fellowship is going to design her own program, which I understand sounds a little loosey-goosey, but I do a lot of grant reviewing, and one of the foundations that I do grant reviewing for is the McKnight Foundation. They're a wonderful organization, and they kind of focus on two areas. One is water, and one is arts. So I've been, doing some things in the arts with them in the past. And when we do the artist grants, each individual person creates his or her own program, and they have to kind of tell us how they're going to evaluate it at the end. So I'm thinking that we're going to model those programs kind of after the grant application and evaluation process that we use for the arts.
But general quantitative data goes, we're going to rely on United States government. Government does, once in 10 years, they do some millions of dollar project to actually test the quality of water. Naturally, as a small organization like us, we will not be able to cover the cost for that, so we will have to wait for the actual government data to come in. But meanwhile, we are also planning to give out water kits, which it is very simple to use, from $40 to $110 at the maximum, which they can simply put the water in, shake it up, wait for it, and can clearly see the quality of the water they have. So it's very simple, it's no-brainer, anyone can use this. So in the small scale, we can test it with that kind of data, but in the long run, we are going to rely on government data.
So what is the economic incentive for a polluter not to pollute? What happens here, this is more of a commons problem where the beneficiaries, recreation people, kids who want to play there, swimmers, etc., they are not the same when polluting. The question is, how would you either reward, incentivize, punish the polluters not to pollute?
If I could maybe address that, that was the same issue that we were faced with in the 70s with the Clean Water, when the Clean Water Act was enacted. And it took, in fact, regulation they took a lot of upswelling from people, and eventually the regulation was enacted, the law was enacted. That's point source pollution, and this is non-point pollution. And there is currently no regulatory oversight of non-point pollution. So all of this is relying on voluntary adoption by the farming industry to reduce pollution. So your question about the market externality of pollution and they are not realizing it, that is true. But what's happening is that fertilizer companies, seed companies and government and nonprofit organizations are all seeing the results of this. And so the farmers have been getting messages. They're not necessarily hearing them, but we believe that we can take those same messages and through our networking, they will now hear those messages.
Just because there is a woman delivering the message, what would really force them to move away from this?
There's no forcing them. Right now, there's no forcing them unless we as a country decide to go to have regulation. But what's needed is an adaptive change so that they are open to recognizing that it is in their best interests to adopt these changes. There have been many years of extension services and manure and fertilizer companies developing what are called the 4 Rs, which are the best practices for drain water management. Those are all known, but they're not being adopted at the level that needs to happen. And so an adaptive change is needed.
So basically, you are appealing to the better angels of farmers, and then the messenger is a woman.
But it's not really better angels. If we want to stay in farming as a community, we have to make these changes.
But that is collectively. What about individual farmer?
Okay, let's do cost-benefit analysis. So, we don't have that. All right.